to episode 5 of Watch Your Assets, where we've got your money on our mind. I'm your host, Steph Bracken, and joining me today is a very special guest. To his dismay, we finally have him on. I've been wanting to get him on for a long time. So, Joe, this is Joe Simon. He is one of our advisors out of our Arlington, D.C. DMV sort of office, and he kind of goes around and travels all over the place to see clients, and he's been absolutely killing it. He and I work very closely together with planning and with advising clients. So, Joe, I'd love for you to just give a little bit about your background, where you came from, how you got here, and what you're looking forward to.
I wasn't expecting that question, Stephanie. My background, huh? Well, welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Joe Simon. I have been in the industry for, 27 years now. I started back in the late 90s with American Express Financial Advisors and Payne Weber. I spent 18 years at a big investment management firm in Boston called Pioneer Investments, which is now Amundi Asset Management. I was a senior VP there, director of their financial planning division. I've been with LPL and YTS now for a little bit over a year, and it's been quite a ride. I get to the great thing about my job is I get to work with a lot of wonderful people, right? All the employees and my coworkers at YTS are just phenomenal, dedicated, motivated people, and the clients even more. We just have such a wonderful client base. 95% of my clients out of the DC area are federal employees. They do some great work for this country, and we're just honored to be able to help them on their financial journey.
Okay, so you and I work closely together, developing and executing on people's financial plans and advising them on investments and other decisions that they can make in their financial lives. I like to say financial planning is how we bulletproof people's situations to protect them against anything that life could throw at them financially. Yeah. What are some of the common pitfalls or obstacles that you see people trying to overcome as we're talking about financial planning?
I mean, I think for me, it really comes down to a lot of times the biggest obstacle with people is themselves, right? A lot of it's centered around budgeting, right? Almost the easiest thing in the world to do is to sit down and come up with a plan. It really comes down to executing on the plan, right? And people sit down all the time, go through the process. We build out a plan, and then unfortunately life gets in the way. Right? They need a new car, or, something happens, or they decide that they want to increase their lifestyle in a way that's outside of their means, and then they don't have the ability to execute on the vision. And, I think more than anything else, it really just comes down to budgeting for a lot of people, and people just don't do it these days. I sit down with people all the time. I'm like, "What's your budget?" And they're, "I don't know."
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, we've done this in planning meetings, right? They have, even people that have plenty of money, plenty of assets, they have no idea what the budget is, and that's really the basis or the foundation for everything we do is budgeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's say I come to you. I'm a client. I just retired. I've got some pension funds. I started my Social Security. I have no idea what my budget is, but I know I'm living outside of my means. What does that conversation look like in terms of how you counsel clients on living within their means without being a jerk?
Well, I mean, that's really just the first project I'm going to give them, right? So really what I want people to do is to self-evaluate and to kind of arrive at the fact that, I am living outside of my means on their own, right?
Yeah.
So, what typically when we first meet a client, it's really just kind of a meet and greet. Hey, let me learn a little bit about you. I want you to learn about, myself, YTS, the team, what we can do here. Make sure it's a fit, right? But then we're going to schedule, and it's always going to lead to a financial planning meeting, right? Because planning is the foundation for everything we do here. It's hard for me to make a recommendation for a client if I don't know what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve, right? What their risk tolerance is, what their appetite in general for risk is. So we're going to schedule that meeting, and one of the assignments that I give them alongside of gathering all their documents, right, so that we can kind of evaluate everything, is really to build a budget, right? And it's not a short-term assignment. By the time they get back to me, I would like a budget, on an Excel sheet, preferably, so we can kind of talk it through and kind of see where their expenditures are. And but then I want them to continue to do that for 2 or 3 months. And typically when I have them build the budget, I have them look back 2 or 3 months. Look at your credit card statements, look at your bank statements, see where you're spending money, see where there's room to tighten up the budget. Even myself, right? Like I evaluate my own budget every 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
At one point, I like Starbucks. I mean, as you can see, gratuitous plug there for Starbucks, right? But I like Starbucks, and didn't realize we were spending $600 a month there until I went back and looked at my budget and all the expenditures.
Yep.
So I think when people sit down and they really evaluate it, you'll see things there that like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was spending all that money on this or that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we start, and that's how we get at it. And again, by having them evaluate on their own, they start to see the trends.
Yeah.
And I think things start to set in like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that it was out of control.
Yeah. And we're not judging.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
Like we're not, I don't want anybody to think that we are shaming them. It is not that. We purely want to counsel them and just make sure we're setting them up properly.
I tell every client that it's the judgment-free zone, right? Yeah. You live your lives the way you want to live your lives. We're just help you, and I always talk about my goal or my job is really to help you get from point A to point B in life. Point A is where you're at, right? And that's different for everybody. Point B is where you'd like to be. Again, that's different for everybody. Yep. In the most efficient way possible, given the means that you have available to you, right? Yep. And the budgeting process is really the beginning of that, right? Because by tightening things up, we can create, more means to help us get to our goals more efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is a judgment-free zone. I mean, and again, I tell clients, we've seen it all. We've seen it all. Yep. So it's just, we want to help you get to where you want to be.
Yeah.
That's all we care about.
Absolutely. Now, you're talking about getting from point A to point B efficiently. Are there strategies that you see or that you implement often that clients might not know about? Maybe they came to you with their statements and they've got $3 million in TSP money and they're never going to touch it and their budget is actually fine. So what are some of those strategies that we can utilize to help them get to whatever that goal is? If it's a legacy goal, what are some of those strategies?
Well, I think a lot of times, I always like to say that nobody's trying to do the wrong thing, right? But what we find a lot of time is people are doing all the right things in all the wrong places. Our goal is to get people to do all the right things in all the right places, right? So, clients a lot of times will have, especially with TSP and our federal employees, a lot of times we'll take a look at their plan, and for their age, they're way too conservative. I mean, they've got all of their money in the G fund. Well, that's all, good and fine, but you're never going to get to where you need to be with the returns that you're going to get in G fund long term, right? So we try to help them come up with a portfolio that's going to meet their needs or be, obviously within their level of risk tolerance, that's going to maximize their return to help them more efficiently get to their long-term goals or achieve their long-term goals.
Yeah.
Another thing is just taxes. I mean, that's a big issue for our clients is taxes, right? Well, it comes down to, again, we have a lot of clients that are federal employees, right? So, and their spouses are federal employees, right? So they have 2 pensions. Yep. They've got Social Security. Sometimes they're military retirees. They have a military pension on top of that. So income is never going to be an issue for them, right? They're never going to outlive their income. They can never even spend the income that they have on a yearly basis. And they have these large TSPs that they've accumulated over 10 or 20 years that could be $1 million or $2 million, right? Well, their issue is taxes, right? And we talk about it. We see it in the plans all the time, right, Stephanie? We run a plan, and the RMDs turn out to be, or the required minimum distributions turn out to be, $300,000-$400,000 a year. We saw one last week that it was $1 million a year.
Yeah.
Which is insane when you think about it, that tax burden. Well, I can't do anything about your pension. I can't do anything about your Social Security, but I can minimize your RMDs, right? So we talk about tax strategies, specifically Roth conversions, right?
Yep.
Especially if we've got time. Well, let's run the numbers, and I'm a numbers guy, you know this. Let's run the numbers. They're going to tell us if it works or not.
Yep.
And if we can get ahead of the taxes by paying some tax early, and get into that tax-free bucket, which is the Roth is my favorite bucket, right? Why not start that?
Yeah.
And more often than not, I think you can agree, it does work for most clients.
Yeah.
It does make sense for most clients.
It does, but
Yeah.
it always depends on the plan, right?
It does. It does. It does. Well, sometimes too. I mean, there are things that we just don't see, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes the numbers work better than others. But there'll be times when it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
But that's what the plan tells us, and that's why we do the plan. That's why we run the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like, we putting the numbers in front of the clients too, it makes it a little bit more concrete.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's hard to tell someone, hey, we want you to pay an extra, $50,000, $100,000 a year in taxes, just without showing them the numbers. Because
Oh, yeah.
yeah, every
Yeah.
time they're like, oh my goodness, really?
Yeah.
But then when you show them how everything plays out, you run the cash flow, you show them, what happens to the plan long term. You show them the difference, in taxes long term. And sometimes it could be, you may end up paying $1 million, $1.5 million less in taxes over a 15 or 20 year period.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's where the planning comes in. If you don't do the planning, it's not concrete to people, and it's hard for them to really, envision what it looks like.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's so important.
Yeah, 100%. And I like the analogy you use with clients when we are talking about Roths of your purchasing power.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of give your analogy that you use?
Yeah,
Or it's not even an
definitely.
analogy, it's just the numbers.
No, it is. It is. I'm going to have to put my coffee down because I get all handsy when I start talking. But let me do that here. So yeah, when we talk about making a conversion Roth, there's always a big tax liability, right? And when you pay the tax, a lot of clients get caught up on their account balance. Well,
Yeah.
I got to stay above this, or I got to be here, right? They get caught up on that number. But for me, it comes down to purchasing power, right? And yeah, of course, if we do a Roth conversion, we pay a big tax bill, our account value is going to drop, right? Because we got to send that money to the IRS, our favorite, what I like to call is our silent partner in all of our retirement plans, right? But when you think of it from a purchasing power standpoint, nothing really changes. So I use the analogy of, say you had $100,000 in your non-retirement account, and you've got $100,000 in your 401k or traditional IRA, right? What's your account balance, Stephanie?
200,000.
200,000, right? But what's your purchasing power? Well, if
Not
you think
that.
about it, yeah. Well, we're going to ignore capital gains and dividends
Sure.
here, just for simplicity's sake. So I can get this 100,000 out of the non-retirement account, tax-free pretty much. But to get the 100,000 out of the IRA, well, I got to pay $30,000, right? We'll just say 30%. So now I'm going to have 170,000, right? That's my purchasing power.
Yep.
So now if we did a conversion and we took this 100,000 that's in the traditional IRA and we converted it to a Roth IRA, now I've got 100,000 in my Roth IRA. But in order to do that, I had to pay $30,000 in taxes, and I did it from my non-retirement account. So now my non-retirement account is $70,000.
70,000, yeah.
Yeah. So what's my account value?
170.
170. So it's less than it was before the Roth conversion, right? When we had 200. But what's my purchasing power?
170.
It's 170. So it's the same exact purchasing power, but going forward, the additional benefit is I have $100,000 in a bucket now that's going to grow tax-free, come out tax-free.
Yep.
So even though my purchasing power is the same and my account value is lower, I'm in a much better position long-term.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Roth.
that's, yeah. And we're not even taking into account, the potential for future tax increases. A lot of people don't realize we're in a historically low tax environment, with 37 being the top end bracket. I mean, in the 70s, it was 70%, right?
Yep.
So, and that's kind of what brought about the creation of, IRAs and 401ks and these deferred, tax vehicles, tax-deferred vehicles.
Yep.
And I always tell a story, too, about, Ronald Reagan back in the days. He used to do 2 movies a year. And the reason why is he got paid $100,000 per movie. And back then, and don't hold me to the exact number, but every dollar you made over $200,000 was taxed at something like 94%. And then the state of California got the rest. So basically, he'd be working for free. So historically, yeah, we're in a very low tax environment. But if you think about where we are, from a big picture standpoint, economy, the state of Social Security, the federal debt, Medicare, everything along those lines, right? Well, those aren't getting better, right? And we're going to have to pay for all of those somehow or somewhere, right?
Yep.
Well, how are we going to do it, right? Well, the government's not, or the politicians aren't going to lower the benefits, right? Because that would be basically political suicide, right? And that's just not how they think. So, well, how do we get additional revenues to support those programs? Well, we've got to raise taxes, right?
Yep.
And what's the best way to do that? Let's go after these IRAs, right? So, so I can realistically see, taxes being, or the higher end brackets being in the 40% range in, 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no guarantee but I mean, all signs point to taxes going up. I think if you polled 100 Americans, 90 of them would probably say that, yeah, taxes are going to increase in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is just a way that we can get ahead of it through Roth conversions, and it just allows us to future-proof our portfolio against future tax increases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And then there's the additional estate planning benefits too of now you're also not especially I think you'd mentioned in your question, well, beneficiaries or future generations, they don't need the money, right? Well, a lot of my clients, we do the Roth conversions not even to benefit them, it's so that they're not passing that tax burden on to their children or their beneficiaries.
Yep.
Right. So it's just one of the many planning tools that we have.
Can you just touch on what happens whenever you inherit a traditional IRA versus a Roth IRA?
Yes. So essentially now, previous to the Secure Act of 2020, if you inherited your parents' IRA, right, you could stretch that over your lifetime. So you'd have to take RMDs, or required minimum distributions, but you could do that over your lifetime. Well, with the Secure Act in 2020, again, the federal government accelerating taxes, right? So we can see the trend here. Now you have to, when you inherit that IRA, you have to take all the money within 10 years. You can do it any way you want. You can take it all in the first year, you can take it all the last year, but you have to, as the beneficiary, take the money or remove the money from that IRA, pay the tax on it, if it's a traditional, and, wherever it goes from there, it's up to you. You can invest it, you can spend it, but you've got to realize that tax date. And the issue is that, well, as that beneficiary, well, it's going to increase your tax liability. It could push you into a higher bracket. And honestly, if you've got parents that, and again, a lot of our employees, I mean, they've got, not our employees, but our clients, they have IRAs, the $2-3 million. And if they've got one child, I mean, that's, even if you did it over 10 years, that could be $200,000-$300,000 a year.
Yep.
Yeah.
All taxable.
So it's a pretty big tax burden, right?
Yep.
The great thing about the Roth IRA, though, is, you still have to get the money out of the plan in 10 years, but it's tax-free. So that's what we love about it.
Oh, I wanted to go back to Social Security for a second. So we were talking about that with a lot of our federal employees who obviously have their pensions and, of course, Social Security. You can watch episode 3 of Watch Your Assets, where I did a whole breakdown of Social Security and the different benefits to Social Security, how the benefits are taxed, all of that. But I want to talk about when you're looking at a client situation in terms of the timing of Social Security. That's one of the biggest questions I think we get whenever we're talking about plans is, when should I take Social Security? And I know it depends, but can you just talk, again, conceptually a little bit about what you see in terms of strategies we can use to maximize people's Social Security benefits?
Well, Stephanie, it depends.
Yep.
A lot of times, my goal is to have clients take Social Security in the way that's going to, I think obviously benefit them financially the most in the long term, right? Every client, that's different. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you need the money to make, to pay your monthly bills, well, yeah, we have to take it right away, right? There's no questions about it. But when you don't need the money, well, then, yeah, it's a different strategy. But then certain things come into play. What's longevity like in your family, right? Because ideally, yeah, we'd wait until age 70, get the biggest benefit, right? And, but, the break even on that is you got to live into your early 80s. So, if you've got health problems, if you don't have longevity in your family, well, then maybe you should take it earlier, right? At least get some sort of benefit from it, right? If you've got a situation where, sometimes this happens with our federal employees or, my military retirees, where one spouse didn't work, or and I don't like to say didn't work, but stayed at home and and took care of the family, which is probably the biggest job of all, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But they may not, their Social Security may just have the spousal benefit, or maybe they only worked 40 quarters and didn't make a lot of money, so their benefit's low, and their husband has a pension or the wife has a pension and the other spouse doesn't, and if one were to pass away, well, there'd be a significant drop in guaranteed income.
Yep.
Well, we may want for the spouse that does have the pension, that did have all the earnings over the years, to wait until they're age 70, purely from the standpoint of creating more guaranteed income for the other spouse, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
because the big thing is, if one spouse has a much lower benefit than the other, and the spouse that has the higher benefit passes away, well, the other spouse will step up to their benefit.
Yeah.
So again, it's just another way to create more guaranteed income for that other spouse.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's the best way to put it, but so in that scenario, we may want them to wait,
Yeah.
right? There are strategies where, one spouse will start theirs at full retirement age, right? We'll have the other one take the spousal benefit, allow their own personal benefit to grow. And when their own personal benefit becomes, it greatly exceeds the spousal, then we'll have them switch it on.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but guess what?
What's
How do we
that?
figure that out?
Look at the plan.
We do through planning, right?
We do it through the
through
plan.
planning, and that's the thing about planning. Really, ultimately, is that it's not, it's tailored and customized to every individual client's needs.
Yep.
Right. There are no two plans that look alike.
Absolutely.
So, and that's why we go through the process. Is it's going to help us create the most efficient roadmap for you as an individual family to reach your goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So how often are you coming back to the plan as people's lives change? So I know, of course, we have to at least offer a review meeting of the portfolio, I think once a year. But how does your plan update work in tandem with that? Is it every so often just as your life changes? Does it depend? What's the right answer?
Well, I personally like to update the plan at least once a year, right?
Yeah.
So my thought process is, some clients we meet with once a year, some 2, 3, or 4 times a year, right? But regardless, my goal is at least on the first meeting of the year is to update the plan.
Yeah.
We may not do a whole review of the plan, but let's make sure the numbers are up to date. That's part of my first review also is, what's worrying you, Mr. and Mrs. Client? Mm-hmm. What concerns do you have right now? And it may be, well, Joe, the state of the economy, I think inflation is going to triple. How's that going to affect me? Well, let's look at the plan. Let's rerun the numbers, right?
Yep.
What happens if, we have a negative market the next 3 years? Well, let's change projections in the plan. Let's see how it works for you.
Yeah.
So, at least once a year, I like to just, again, at least update the numbers. Don't have to do an in-depth review, and then use the plan to illustrate anything that's, the client wants to see or that's concerning to them. Mm-hmm. I think at a very minimum, we're going to want to do a full-blown plan and, in-depth whenever there's a big life change.
Yeah.
Right? We're going into retirement. We're having children, right? Kids are going to college. Anytime, new job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So anytime there's a major life change, we're probably going to want to do a more in-depth review of the plan.
Yeah.
But, I think we should at least be updating it once a year and doing kind of a broad brush overview of the plan.
Yeah.
And then, again, it's always come down with the client's need as well.
Of course.
That's one of the things at YTS, right? We may have a regular meeting schedule of once or 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, but we really don't limit our clients. If you have a need and you need to see us, we're going to get you on the calendar, and we're going to help you. We're going to answer your questions and make sure that we've addressed your needs overall.
So I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier with the budgeting conversation about the maybe feeling embarrassed or feeling shame around your money management. Mm-hmm. So for people who have kind of pushed off financial planning or coming to see an advisor, getting some kind of financial counseling, how do you tell clients and stress the importance of planning often and early?
Yeah. Never feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
Never feel embarrassed. Listen, I always tell everybody the fact that you're sitting in front of me and we're having this conversation is the first and biggest step, right? So, I mean, that's the most important thing. And again, always remember, I mean, again, judgment-free zone.
Yeah.
You're here now, right? Let's put a plan together. But the key is, again, ultimately is, you can be in front of me. We can be doing this process or engaging in this planning process. You have to be committed to follow through, right? Executing on the plan. Because none of this does us any good unless you're committed to executing on the plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's why you work with us, right? Is we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to have those regular meetings to make sure that, you kept the budget tight this year. You invested the dollars you needed to invest. You didn't run up your credit card bills again, right? So that's kind of my job. I'm kind of your accountability partner.
Yeah.
And, and I take that seriously, right?
Absolutely.
And, I tell clients all the time, that's the one thing you're going to get from me is brutal honesty, right? I'm always going to tell you how it is, but it's because I care, right? I want you to achieve your goals. I want you to have a comfortable retirement. I want you to be able to do the things that you want to do and have money not be an issue.
Yeah.
So if I don't hold you accountable and I don't, and I'm not a realist and I don't tell you like it is, well, then I'm doing you a disservice.
Yeah.
So.
And if you don't tell a client, who will? So I think there are a lot of times where people just hear what they want to hear, or nobody tells them the things they need to hear. So we can be that sounding board for them.
Yeah, and honestly, that's kind of, early on in my career, actually in the beginning of my career, one of the first clients that I brought on board, it was a couple in their 70s, and they had multiple different advisors in their life. And they came because they were looking for a change. They weren't happy with their current advisor. And, after doing a financial plan and going through the numbers, I was flabbergasted. They were going to run out of money. And they were going to run out of money probably in 5 or 6 years based on their spending, how their assets were invested, right? And, as a young advisor, that's a tough conversation to have with a couple in their 70s. But I realized I had to do it because if I didn't, I'd be doing them a disservice. Yeah. And the funny thing is when I had that meeting and I talked to them about it, again, they were shocked. They had no idea. They said to me, Joe, we're so appreciative that you were direct and honest with us about our situation. Every advisor we'd had up to this point told us we were fine. And it was a shame. It had someone addressed it with them earlier, well, they could have gotten ahead of it, right?
Yep.
But they were committed to the process. We went through. We spent 6 months reviewing their budget.
Wow.
And we built a new budget for them. They cut out all their unnecessary expenses, and they did it.
Yeah.
And over a course of a couple of years, we got them back on track. We were a little bit more aggressive with their investments than we typically would have liked to be because we had some time to make up for.
Yeah.
But we got them back on track. I mean, they don't have endless amounts of money now, but the assets support their spending now.
Good.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're projecting to not run out of money, but it's only because we had a real conversation about what their situation was like. And again, I think they really, really appreciate it. So that kind of shaped how I think about how I work with clients going forward.
Yeah. And I think one of the other conversations that's tough to have is about people's mortality. That's another one of those things that people don't want to think about. That's a scary thing. We're all going to obviously go through it, but you don't want to think about it.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm
You're going to live forever.
I tell you that all the time. Mortality, what's that, right?
That's a good joke because we need you.
That's right. I'm getting ready to redo my plan. Can we put infinity as my death date?
Software only lets me go to 110.
Well, we got to get that fixed. You got to tell them they need a Joe update, right? So we can make this thing work.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. Nobody wants to talk about death.
Yeah.
Right. It's an uncomfortable thing, especially when it's a client that's older. Because if you're in your your late 60s, 70s, it's a lot more real. Right?
Yeah.
So it's typically an uncomfortable conversation. And then the problem with the younger clients is it's so far away they don't even think about it.
Right.
Right? So it's always an interesting but that's I guess that's one of those things that you kind of have to just gauge the client, who you're working with when having those conversations about, survivorship and mortality. But it's something, again, you've got to do.
You have
right?
to, yeah.
You've got to, because it is real. It's death and taxes, right? Those are the only two things that,
We're guaranteed in life.
Yep, guaranteed, yep.
Yeah. I know. I always want to make sure somebody has a will, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, some life insurance potentially, maybe some long-term care insurance. Those are things that are common themes. You have to have a will, or else you're going to die intestate, and then you're going to have a bunch of court hearings. Well, you won't, but your beneficiaries will. So I guess maybe you don't care, but your beneficiaries will care. So it's not just about you. It's about the people you're going to leave anything behind too.
We've seen that process take a year or more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's again, we're obviously not attorneys, right?
Yep.
But we do work with and refer to great attorneys that we've vetted, that we can make sure that, and again, that's one of the keys here, right? Is making sure that all the pieces of your plan work together.
Yep.
So it's whether it's your CPA, your attorney, your financial plan, and if you don't have someone, we obviously have people that we've vetted that we work with that we're more than happy to refer you to.
Yeah. We didn't talk about investments. Do you want to? Because I think I asked Josh. I can't remember if I asked him specifically about this, but like your big thing is asset allocation versus asset location. And I think we might be back to the Roth conversation again.
It's kind of it's just back from the tax efficiency standpoint, right? So a lot of advisors, obviously most advisors use asset allocation, right? That's really basically, taking a look at, what your risk tolerance is, and making sure essentially we have all the right dollars focused in the right amounts in the right places. So we've got some small companies, mid companies, large companies. We have foreign, domestic, growth, value. The goal is to put you on what's called the efficient frontier. So you have the most efficient portfolio from a risk-reward standpoint based on your risk tolerance, right?
Yep.
Almost every advisor uses that when creating a portfolio. But they don't do it in a tax-efficient way. So what will happen is, say your asset allocation says that you should be 50-50, 50% stocks, 50% bonds, right? Most advisors will do, have your Roth will be 50-50. Your traditional IRAs will be 50-50.
Yeah.
Your 401k will be 50-50. Your non-retirement account will be 50-50. And it's right. You got a 50-50 portfolio, right?
Yep.
Well, we like to take it to another level and, employ what's, asset location, right? Which essentially means, we do want to have a 50-50 portfolio overall, but, where do I want my most aggressive assets that are going to grow the most?
Roth.
Well, I want those in Roth, right? Because that's tax-free.
Yep.
Where do I want my investments that, that pay dividends and interest? I want it in my traditional IRA because I'm paying full income tax rate on that anyways, right?
Yeah.
And then we use a non-retirement fund or a non-retirement account to balance things out. So, we'll in the end have a 50-50 portfolio, but it's going to be a little bit more tax efficient because we're using asset location.
Yeah.
We're putting the right assets in the right bucket from a tax standpoint as well.
Yeah. And I think that's also where having the global picture of everything the client has really comes into play too, where we're looking at their financial plan, not because we want to manage all their assets, but we want to at least know what they have so we can position the assets that they have with us to align with everything else they have.
Yeah, it's funny, I laugh because that happens all the time.
Yeah.
You get clients that and it makes sense, right? You don't want to have all your eggs in one bucket with an advisor, and that's fine. So clients will not tell us about certain things they have sometimes because that way it's kind of their secret little bucket of money that they can manage, or it's somewhere else that But and I tell clients all the time, we don't need to have all your assets. I mean, we'd love to have them, right? Because we think we can do a great job with them, but we don't need to. But we do need to know about them from a planning standpoint because we want to make sure that everything that you have works well together.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's why we want to know about your 401k or your TSP. That's why I want to know about assets you may have with another advisor, or that you're managing on your own because it's your fund money, right? Because we want all the pieces to work together. And we with that, we're going to make adjustments that we're doing based on what else you have to make sure you have the best plan available.
Yep, absolutely.
Remember, if you want to reach me, or if you got some questions for me, call the number there.
Yes, thank you.
We had to do that because I didn't know the number. But I mean, I know who calls himself. My ego's not that big, right? So.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, give us a like, give us a follow. It's Watch Your Assets on all social media, and we will see you on the next one. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA/SIPC.